Near and dear to my heart, and that's stormwater, and I want to thank Senator Hertzberg for initiating this hearing. Also wanted to acknowledge my staff work of Dennis O'Connor, and I think it's very timely. Senator Hertzberg and I both represent the San Fernando Valley, so when you think of the San Fernando Valley, this is the face of the San Fernando Valley, right? So stormwater is a really important topic. I know we're looking at the financing, we're looking at opportunities, we're looking at obstacles and challenges. I think, Bob, you put together an excellent group of panelists. It's very instructive, it's very timely. Recent legislation relating to stormwater and how we look at it, as well as $200 million in this state water bond for the first time, recognizing that stormwater is a resource for water, it's not a liability. And that's a real change of dynamics here in Sacramento. And so, as someone who's very focused on regional solutions, if you're from the LA area in particular, and other areas as well, looking at this asset washing down the LA River and into the ocean with every storm, the public in general gets this. We need to figure out a way how to reuse that, capture and reuse that stormwater, but it's complicated. Bob, did you want to offer some comments?
Yeah, just very briefly, you know, I just want to reiterate what Fran said, what the chairwoman said about how important this is. You know, as we face these challenges in climate change, as we face the declining snowpack and a state that is historically had this unbelievable challenge with respect to water, where the vast population is where the water isn't, that we've got to be creative, that we have basically taken a local approach with respect to stormwater and dry runoff, and that maybe it's time for the state to offer a bigger picture view on this, that maybe it's time to integrate this in the larger plan. Senator Pavley's measure last year in terms of groundwater, an important step, but quite frankly, it's a very big deal. I served about 30 years ago on a commission appointed by Jess Unruh, where we did double piping systems in South Orange County and North San Diego County, spent about $7 billion. A really innovative kind of a thing. It's called the District Securities Commission, which no longer exists. And although certainly the people of California, the legislature and the governor did an incredible job in passing the bond issue last year, it's a very small step in really capturing the extraordinary amount of water. I was in the office earlier, she'll testify with Esther Feldman, talking about the near half of the LA County's water is literally from dry runoff, that if we could capture it, we could actually not have to import water. We've got all of these north-south challenges of importing water. We get environmental water, and right before us we have this great opportunity. And the last thing just 2 points I want to say is, one is that I think that if we move away from just the strictly governmental tax and spend model, that there's unbelievable financing opportunities, in my view, to come up with ways, because the cost of local water is so much cheaper than wheeled water, than imported water, and that delta gives us an opportunity to finance privately, because there's just extraordinary amount of capital that exists in the marketplace for this kind of financing that gives the high wage jobs and all the stuff that we count for. And the last one's a point of personal privilege, and that is I used to sit on the board of the Public Policy Institute. And as Ellen comes up to testify, I just wanted to say it's a not-for-profit entity. I'm no longer a board member, but I just wanted to let everybody know and disclose my deep respect and involvement with the PPIC and extreme prejudice in their favor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Hertzberg, and thank you for making sure we realize we're not talking just about stormwater, but dry weather runoff. In Los Angeles, it doesn't have to be raining for you to have runoff. We have it year-round through urban areas and through our watersheds. So this, again, highlights the need for some very progressive policies. If we're not using water more than once, probably 2 or 3 times, we are not going to be able to survive the impacts of climate change. So I wanted to know if any other members wish to say something before we go right into our first panel. Orange County has no problems, Santa Clara, all,
We have a lot of problems.
no.
Orange County's a great water
I know,
system.
we have actually great representatives from urban areas where stormwater, this is a huge issue, right?
Right.
Absolute issue all the way around. Okay, so first panel, if you'd move forward, we're going to look at the current challenges to funding stormwater and dry weather runoff projects. We know about 218 barriers, but we're looking to see what we can do. We have with us Ellen Hannock. Dr. Hannock is a senior fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California, which is a nonpartisan research institute, and I know she's appeared before me many, many times, and your expertise is well known, and we always appreciate your attendance. Also speaking after Helen, Chris Birch, is that correct? Executive Manager, Engineering Assistant General Manager of the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, and you've done a great job on recycled water and looking at regional water management. The right people at the right time. Ellen, please proceed.
Thank you very much for inviting me to give a little bit of an intro. I'm going to be talking based on some work that we did in depth on water finance in California that came out last year, and I provide a few broad highlights for stormwater. When I say stormwater, I also mean dry season runoff, just as a shorthand for this. So this is one of the areas that we consider a fiscal orphan, and just I have some slides printed out in front of you that with just some figures that might be helpful just in kind of setting it in context. The first one on page 2 just shows you the distribution of where the spending happens on which activities in California in water each year. This is for a 4-year average. And overall, it's about $30 billion that we spend on water. Most of it's local. That's the orange colors there. And I want to say that we really struggled the most to figure out how much we're spending on stormwater programs, because that's one of those things that is kind of often hidden as a component of a Department of Public Works or so on. And part of the challenge that these agencies have in raising funds reflects the sort of fact that they often have to just use general fund monies for it and kind of catch as catch can. So we estimated, based on some local studies, that it's probably about $500 million a year that's spent right now on stormwater at the local level. If you go to slide 3, you'll see our little fiscal report card, and just to again set it in context, stormwater among the various things that we do in California, it's one of the ones that's failing in terms of us not being able to raise the funding that we need every year to do what we need to do. And we estimate that probably somewhere between $500 million and between $500 and $800 million a year deficit relative to to meet current regulatory standards. And that's doing that in a cost-effective way, because there are some ways that you can do it that make it much more expensive. So not basically doubling or more what's currently spent is what needs to happen. You mentioned in the intro Prop 218, slide 4 just kind of runs through. There are actually 3 constitutional amendments that are important for stormwater funding. The first was Prop 13, and I just highlighted here on this slide, just in red, the things that are especially important for thinking about what local stormwater managers have to think about when they try to raise money. Prop 13 created a category of local special taxes which require 2/3 voter approval, and that is relevant for a lot of the sort of, if a local agency wants to raise a tax that is specifically earmarking money for stormwater, it's likely going to have to be a special tax like that. Prop 218, which you mentioned, introduced for all kinds of property-related services, including stormwater that's related to properties, like runoff from properties, strict cost of service requirements that mean you have to not charge more than what the program's costing. That's fine, but also some specific definitions for exactly showing that linkage in a very precise way, which can be difficult. And it also, for both flooding and for stormwater programs, introduced the requirement to actually go to the voters. So not just noticing the voters like we do with water and wastewater and allowing the possibility of protest, but also once you do that, you have to do that, and then you have to go and get a vote. So it's either 50% of the property owners or 2/3 of the popular vote in the area. And then the last one I'll just mention, Prop 26 in 2010, a lot of stormwater pollution problems are from runoff off of properties, but some of it is not. Some of it's not property related. It's, trash around fast food places, or, it's your cars, and the fact that we're, in dry season, the chemicals that kind of drip out of your cars end up being a problem. So non-property related fees were made, the definition of that was made tighter by Prop 26, and that's potentially affecting the ability of local governments to charge for things like, a surcharge on cigarettes in order to be able to help pay for the cleanup of the cigarette butts, that kind of thing. Exactly. So in our analysis, we found that stormwater was really, of the various types of local water services, was the one that was in some ways most hampered by this new constitutional environment, because by and large, the regulatory requirements for stormwater kind of kicked in at the time that Prop 218 was passed. So, stormwater used to just be about getting drainage off the streets. And now it's also about limiting pollution that's entering the waterways. And that's with permitting requirements on cities and counties, and that mandate basically came in at a point when it became much harder to raise the money for that. It's also in some ways harder than flood control, even, because with flood control you can say you have some of the similar requirements, but at least it's protecting the actual property that you're paying. As a homeowner, if I'm going to be charged for it, it's protecting me from flooding. Whereas a lot of the damage from stormwater is not to me, it's to Dennis downstream from me, or, so it's to folks not necessarily right in the community. And then I just point out that costs are rising for this. So our estimate of the gap of $500 to $800 million a year, that's with current standards, but there's a sense in which a lot of concern by agencies that the costs are going to be increasing as new pollutants get factored into these permits. So it's definitely something that we need to watch. Now, slide 6 highlights the issue that Senator Pavley and Senator Hertzberg, that you both raised about using stormwater as a resource, and the idea of really integrating it into our water supply system and integrated water management, where you're not only dealing with the pollution problem, but you're also capturing in a way that allows you to augment the water supply. And there's been a lot of exciting development and piloting this kind of work. Success with this requires a few things. One of them is breaking down some management silos, because it's usually not the same agency that's in charge of the stormwater permit and in charge of increasing water supply. It also requires raising funds, and that often requires these agencies to pull monies from different sources. Now, water supply agencies can use water bills toward the water supply part of stormwater, and that's an exciting development, and the legislature actually helped to clarify some of that last year. But I'll just caution you that often will not mean picking up the whole tab for stormwater. So the stormwater agencies themselves on the pollution side, if they're incremental aspects that are not water supply related, we still have to deal with that problem for them. So the bond is going to help. There's already been some bond money toward this. The bond will help. Slide 7 just shows you stormwater and the other fiscal orphans that we identified. The gap, you can see in the middle of the table there, and then what's coming from Prop 1. So, Prop 1 is going to provide $200 million, which is super valuable and welcome, I know, but it's not, it's less than a year's gap relative to what folks are facing. So we suggested a number of other ways to try to raise funds, both at the state and at the local level. And I just, the next slide gives a few examples of the kinds of things where local governments have been successful. Slide 8, I will highlight that that's mostly in coastal areas where there is a much closer connection between the problem and the people that are living there. Because if you're a coastal community and you've got trash on your beach, that's hurting your economy as well. If you're an inland community and you're causing that trash, you have less motivation maybe. So this list includes things like general obligation bonds. City of LA successfully passed a $500 million bond in 2004. Some places have been able to successfully pass new property-related fees and assessments, and give a couple of examples there: Burlingame, Santa Clarita. San Mateo County has an interesting option, which is worth thinking about elsewhere, which is a transportation-related fee. It's an add-on to the vehicle registration fee, and it's basically to help deal with the transportation or the costs of stormwater management that are originating from the transportation side of things. Some places have special taxes. An example from the North Coast, Ferndale. And then one that I think is important to think about expanding is a surcharge on the water bill of a particular kind. And this is in budget-based systems like Irvine Ranch has or Santa Margarita. The upper tiers, so for folks who are really using much more water than their budget, in the summer, that's basically the dry season runoff from overwatering. And it's,
Can you help us
Yeah.
for people that don't have great memories? So we're
Sure.
here at the time, AB 801 enacted in 2001. What was that?
Your speaker. You have it memorized?
That
all
was
the numbers?
that was probably your bill, right? No. So what that allowed was, okay. So Senator, I don't remember. I looked at it this morning and I didn't keep in mind the, but okay. So I'll tell you what it did though, and this is what I like about it. So the budget-based tiered water rates, where you pay, you have a certain amount, a budget, an allocation-based system, and then if you're wasting, or if you're using more water, you pay a higher fee, and then the upper tiers are really for folks who are using a lot of extra water, which almost always is extra landscape watering. That's full of chemicals and pollutants, so that's running into Newport Bay and places like that. So what this bill did was expand the mandate of Irvine Ranch and Santa Margarita to say that that stormwater management is part of their purview, so they can use those sort of penalty rates, the high tiers. They can use that for stormwater management. And if you think about the fact that that's causing pollution, that water wastage, it's a very close connection. It's a great nexus, I think, but the thing about this bill was it was one of those special bills that the water code is full of that are just for those. It was kind of a pilot. Think about it as a pilot. It's working as far as I'm concerned. So,
Your rate
right.
structures.
So I would this is the kind of thing that I would just suggest as sort of some low-hanging fruit to expand the possibility of using those funds, which other places use it for conservation programs, and then that's certainly a good nexus too. But actually using it for the dry season pollution can be useful too.
Madam Chair, Irvine Ranch has always kind of pushed I don't know if they're here today, but we did a bill that had to do with conservation rates and allowing the tiered rates, and that was sometime in the mid-2000s.
Yeah.
And it was signed by the governor.
Yeah, so it's nice in the sense of you think about it as a laboratory. If it's working, then extend that. So that's one of my suggestions in my last slide 9, of just ways in which the legislature can help, I think. And one of them is this idea of extending local funding authorities. Even without touching the Constitution, there are ways to do that. So I think last year, one of the several bills that helped in this was AB 2403, which basically codified the Pajaro Valley decision and said, things like stormwater and recycled water can be used as a water supply source, and therefore they are something that legitimately under Prop 218 does not have to is a water supply and doesn't have to go to voters. I think extending that AB 801 authority would help. I think facilitating integration, and when we think about integrated water management, we should not forget transportation as part of this. And that there was a picture earlier of the green streets in Burlingame. This is a lot of our communities are doing complete streets right now. There's a lot of transportation money in that. With a little add-on, you can add the green street, rain garden aspect of it. The constraints, as far as I understand, at least for the last bonds, did not allow local governments to use the transportation dollars that they get back from the state, which are collected from their residents through the gas tax. They could not use that as a local match. And that's the kind of thing that, if it's possible to address, might be an easy fix to help them get there, provide local funding for that. We're suggesting also that the state could usefully pass some fees and taxes at the state level to help pay for this, like, for example, a small increment, just like there is for underground storage tanks, small increment on fuels that could help with the stormwater control related aspects of that. Even street trash, fast food trash is apparently one of the biggest problems in terms of trash. And this again, these don't have to be big things at all. And then the last is thinking about lowering costs at the source. That's something the state can do better, and that'll help lower the cost of these programs. And there have been some good examples of that with pesticide regulations on use to prevent overuse of pesticides. Matters tremendously. Changing out copper brake pads. That's a state level decision that locals can't really do on their own. So I'll just end there. Thank you.
Thank you, and that was just about 10 minutes or so, and for the future panelists, if you sort of keep that in mind, Bob and I are experts at math, and we multiplied 10 minutes each by how many? Nine speakers, and if we don't keep interrupting, we'll be here through dinner, right?
Well, interrupting will probably do so. Make it 6 minutes. Yeah. But then also, can you listen to the other speakers in the sense of these ideas and try to not be duplicative, and repeat stuff. So just listen and pay attention. That way, it'll help it be more constructive. I think.
Thank you. Very good suggestion.
Can I ask before you go to the next speaker? Can I just ask you a quick question on this? Speaking of the time. Why don't you have revenue bonds in this thing? Why can't we do JPAs? I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I'll only say that is because as we're sitting here now facing these budget crises, right? We've got doctors who want reimbursements. We've got foster kids. We've got kids who we got budget money. And anytime I was talking to Esther about this, anytime you put more pressure on the tax dollar, there's 100 ways. The cost of this recaptured water, according to the County of Los Angeles, we just had a meeting about this, $300 an acre foot. Met's charging $1,000 an acre foot. That delta is financeable like nobody's tomorrow in terms of entering into contracts that's financeable. How come it's all? Because what worries me is that you're crowding out all these other government things that we want to do, and it's just tax and fees versus there's a ton of money to do this from a private sector approach. Am I wrong?
So I'll just quickly answer that. Revenue bonds need a source to pay them back, and I think water bills. I mean, the water supply agencies use them all the time. So I'm not excluding. I just think of that as a way of financing versus a source of money. You have to have the underlying source. And the problem with a stormwater agency that is just doing traditional stormwater pollution management is getting the original source to be able to pay back that revenue bond.
But if you're really looking, I mean, there's kind of a couple of dimensions. Last question, go, Jerry. Is this?
Because I will cut you.
That's right. So, but here's really important because you can look at all the regulatory side, which is small ball. At the end of the day, I'm deeply concerned about water supply in Southern California. Clearly, this dry runoff and stormwater runoff, by orders of magnitude in the county, we see the San Gabriel Valley in a normal year completely supplied by stormwater. We have the systems. We could create big, huge systems, grabbing the Hyperion water, doing what Orange County does, and dramatically deal with that. The environmental piece is huge, no question. It's harder to finance. But the big pieces of capturing the vast amount of water to avoid the drought problem, it seems to me the only way you're going to finance that is with $10 billion of construction, puts a lot of people to work, and really moves a lot of water.
No, I agree, and I think you'll see in our scorecard, water supply and wastewater we grade them as mostly okay because they are able to fund through by users, and so the more we can do that with stormwater, the better.
Thank you, Ellen. And Senator Bates had it.
Very quickly, I just want to mention what Orange County did with our sales tax measure. We included in that about $500 million, which included water quality projects, and incentivized local governments to apply for competitive grant approach for water quality issues, storm the runoff and all of that, and it's been very successful. So that's one of those innovative approaches to getting the locals to approve new fees or taxes when there's something in there that's directly related to one of the community values. And certainly on coastal communities, water quality is huge. So I wanted to make sure you had that, and you've mentioned other communities, but Orange County was a leader in putting that into our sales tax measure, passed by a very conservative community.
And part of the challenge, to interrupt one more time and break my own rule, is the silos within the local governments. You have LA County sanitation department or public works department, and then the LA City DWP versus their equivalent to their public works department. And so that's been some of the challenges. So Chris, without further ado, please.
Well,
Thank you for coming all the way up here and spending some time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. This is obviously a program and a project that the agency is very proud of, and it's been something that I've been involved in personally for the last 15 years. So I probably have more input on some of the things that we would do different, and I think that's probably as interesting to the group as that. Just real quickly, IUA, we're a regional public wholesale water, wastewater, recycle water provider, as well as a water resource management agency for southwest portion of San Bernardino County, about 830,000 people. Generally, our service area overlies the Chino groundwater basin, which is about 5 million acre-foot worth of groundwater in the Chino basin, making it one of the largest in California. About the size of Lake Shasta, I guess, if it were full. So it's obviously not all available at any given time, but we do have annual yield of about 140,000 acre-foot a year based on what goes in and what goes out, and that's about serve a population of about 280,000 people for a year. So it's pretty substantial. That area, as most of you probably know, the Chino, Ontario, Rancho Cucamonga corridor there, it's changed significantly over the last 50 years. It used to be much more agricultural and dairy. It's definitely urbanized significantly, and it will continue over the next 25 years. With that came some significant challenges with regards to how we're dealing with water supplies and then how we're dealing with stormwater. And the project that I want to talk about really kind of brought those two together, which I think is on topic for this. The pervious surfaces and all the channels were all unlined, and now they're all lined, and they were designed to get the water out of Chino Basin. Yeah. And now that's what we're dealing with. We're trying to restore back some of the water that was once captured. Now it's lost. So we estimate that about 50,000 acre-foot a year, which is about roughly 25% of the total water supply needs for our region, are lost every year to the Santa Ana River, and some of that's captured by Orange County. Others goes to the ocean. Our idea is to set up protocols and systems so that we can use it at least once before it's provided back to the Santa Ana River, and try to get more use out of that and reduce imported water demands. With this coming into play and realizing that nearly 40% of our pumping within the Chino Basin it makes up about 40% of our total water supply is pumped out of the groundwater basin. We realize that it's not sustainable nor good public policy to continue to import more imported water and deplete the groundwater basin and reduce that yield. So that was really fundamental on bringing some partners together. So with some of these challenges with addressing drought and enhancing those public water supplies, we partnered with the Chino Basin Water Master and started getting other partners, including the San Bernardino County Flood Control District and a local water conservation district, bringing people together to say how are we going to stop this madness and make some plans going forward. We all had different priorities, and there's all different similar goals, but definitely different priorities, and bringing those together was tricky. And I think that was one of our biggest challenges is how do we bring everybody back together, realizing that it's going to cost a lot of money. There's a lot of unknowns, and we all have different regional goals. So that was a challenge. But everybody in general wanted to do the right thing, and I think that's what the common message was within the group. Some of the bottom line for the local agencies, the ones that were ultimately going to be paying for this, it came down to dollars and cents. They were comparing it to alternative water supply, and really for the alternative water supply for us is imported water from the Delta. The flood control district is obviously concerned about making sure that flood control is paramount in their mission, but we wanted to partner with them because there's obviously facilities that could be used for common different uses. So when we came together, we developed a program and implemented a program in about 2004 is when it started to implement about $50 million worth of improvements that enhanced existing just flood control basins and channels and conveyance structures for the purposes of stormwater capture, dry weather runoff, and also to try to do things with other opportunities such as recycle water recharge and imported water recharge on wet years when there's water that is available. And what ended up being created through the program more than doubled our stormwater capture for the region, which was significant for us. And then reliably, we capture all dry weather flows within that project area, and that was an added benefit on there. I provided a pamphlet. Hopefully you have it. It's an overview of our service area, but if you look on the back, It has some description of the different recharge facilities, and I thought it's pretty helpful to kind of give you an idea of the breadth of the facilities. They're throughout the whole service area, and they're connected by, like I said, all those concrete channels. Some of the things that we considered were fundamental to the success of the program. One was agreements. Getting the agreements between 4 public agencies with different missions and goals was tough. But ultimately, as we were able to bring that together, we helped define costs and roles, and it was a big part of the project success, is bringing all those partners together. Other is the funding, obviously, which is key to today. 2 parts of that I'd like to focus on. One is the grant funding aspect of it. It was important, and I think the local parties really were interested in finding out how we could have subsidies to help implement some of these programs that hadn't been cost effective before in their minds. What I actually think was the biggest success of some of the grant funding that we were able to receive is it really set the catalyst on bringing some very different people together to meet some common goals. And what we were able to do is, using those timelines and stuff associated with the grants, we were able to get some monumental agreements done for our region, and we're still living off of those agreements now. I can't underemphasize that enough. We were able to get significant grant funding. There was about $25 million worth of grant funding that was received through DWR and the State Water Resource Control Board, and that was obviously significant in helping to try to fund these projects. But as I mentioned, that was leveraged against significant local investments. So over $150 million locally was invested. But once again, it was more the catalyst, I think, is the important part of that. And then for how we were going to deal with some of those local funding, was everyone, all 10 different local agencies, going to be paying for it? We didn't think that was realistic. Our board took a bold step, I think, to say we wanted to bond this and do this as a regional entity, and find ways that the people that are going to benefit from the stormwater recharge to be able to get the benefit of that, and then make payments over time. So the agency was able to do that. Quickly on the things that I think we learned is, one, it's not easy. It was very hard, and there's it was complex, and it was hard to coordinate. But I think in the end product, we have a much better product at the end. We've got a lot of agencies that truly realize that they were part of this overall project. Also understanding how the grant funding became defining where the tipping point is, and finding out where that point is where the projects can be implementable. That was important. One of the other things that we recognized was the value of not underestimating the planning effort for things, and we're doing that now, and I would encourage everyone to do it. Do as much planning as you can ahead of time, understand what the yield benefits are, understand what the costs are, and then prioritize them, and then do programmatic CEQA if you can, and if we can get those things done, you're ready to jump on opportunities when they present themselves. And then the other item that we really learned is the critical, as we mentioned, the nexus between the fees and the actual services that are provided. It's something that we're going through a process right now and to refine, but to try to defensively and appropriately balance user fees versus tax revenues versus what development should fund. Those are all things that are going into our budget modeling now to make sure that we can fund these kind of things going forward. It hasn't been a painless or a perfect process, but I think in the end it was a very good one. Things that I would ask that you consider as we start looking towards enticing these type of projects in the future, giving extra, and this is Martha Davis's term, sparkle points. I'm an engineer, I would never come up with that myself, but sparkle points. Yeah, it works for Martha, she's good. So sparkle points for multi-use projects where you're trying to bring all these people in with all these different opportunities and multi-benefits. How you find when we're competing for grant funding, how you try to encourage those multi-benefit projects. I'd really encourage that, because I think there's a lot of projects out there that, although they could be a great stormwater project, try to get that recycled water component in there, or some type of imported water on wet year supply. Another thing we'd ask is to consider the financing options. It was brought up on the JPAs. That's one of the things that we're looking at very closely. Assembly Bill 850 will really kind of open the door. I know that LA is doing some work with that regarding setting up JPAs for regional type programs. We're interested and we're looking at that and seeing if it's a good fit for our region on our next phase of projects, to see if there's a way that we can kind of decouple our agency as a wastewater agency from the stormwater so that they can be very specific to the stormwater, and the debt associated with that is specific to the JPA and not necessarily burdened by our wastewater payers. And then also state loans have played a huge part in our programs. And, the continuation of low interest loans for long periods of time, such as the state revolving fund loans, have played a huge part in our ability to be able to do that, recycle water and leverage that $200 million worth of local infrastructure. So being able to continue to do those and apply those to stormwater type programs would be very helpful. I hope I didn't take up too much time, but thank you very much.